What if I told you that the world you see isn't real? What if everything you experience is a carefully constructed illusion? It sounds like science fiction, but it's the truth. Your brain is constantly distorting reality. You just don't notice it. We tend to think our eyes work like cameras, capturing the world exactly as it is. But this is far from accurate. Our brains play a much more active role. They take in sensory information and then mold it into a coherent picture. This picture, our perception, feels real, but it's actually a reconstruction, not an exact reflection. Think about it. Your eyes are bombarded with light, shapes, and colors. Your ears pick up a jumble of sounds. Your skin feels pressure, temperature, and texture. It's chaos out there. Your brain, however, acts as a filter. It sorts through this mess of sensory data. It then creates a simplified version of reality. This edited version is what we experience as the world around us, but this editing process isn't always perfect. Our brains can make mistakes. They can be tricked by illusions. They can be influenced by our past experiences. This is where things get really interesting. This is where we start to see that our perception of reality is far more subjective than we realize. Let's dive deeper into how your brain builds your reality. Imagine you see a red apple. Light bounces off the apple and enters your eye. This light signal then travels to the back of your brain, to a region called the visual cortex. The visual cortex is like a busy workshop. It's filled with specialized cells called neurons. Different neurons respond to different features of the apple. Some neurons fire when they detect the color red, others react to the round shape. Still others process the apple's texture. All this information is then pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle. This allows your brain to form a complete picture of the apple. But here's the catch. This process is not just about passively receiving information. Your brain also relies heavily on its own internal models and predictions. Your brain has learned over time what an apple looks like, how it smells, and even how it tastes. So when you see something that resembles an apple, your brain uses these pre-existing expectations to fill in the gaps. This speeds up the process of perception, but it also makes your brain vulnerable to errors. Think of your visual cortex as a film editor. It receives raw footage from your eyes. But instead of showing you everything, it cuts and pastes. It highlights certain details and downplays others. This creates a narrative that makes sense to you. This editing process is essential. It helps us to navigate the world efficiently. Imagine if you had to consciously process every single detail of your surroundings. You'd be overwhelmed. Your brain filters out irrelevant information so you can focus on what's important. However, this filtering system can also lead to mistakes. For example, have you ever failed to notice something obvious in plain sight? This is called inattentional blindness. It happens when your brain is so focused on one task that it misses other things. Inattentional blindness is just one example of how our brains can trick us. There are many other ways in which our perception can be distorted. These distortions reveal the hidden workings of our minds. They show us that reality is not always what it seems. Our brains are constantly making predictions about the world. These predictions are based on our past experiences, our beliefs, and our current goals. These predictions influence how we perceive things. They can even change what we see and hear. For example, imagine you're walking through a forest at night. You hear a rustling sound. Your heart starts to race. Is it just the wind? Or could it be a dangerous animal? If you're already afraid, your brain might interpret the rustling as a threat. This is because fear can heighten our senses. It makes us more likely to perceive danger, even if none exists. This is just one example of how our expectations can shape our perception. Studies have shown that people are more likely to see what they expect to see. They are also more likely to hear what they expect to hear. This is true, even if the evidence contradicts their expectations. Our brains are wired to seek out patterns and make sense of the world, but sometimes, in our eagerness to find meaning, we see patterns that aren't there. We hear things that aren't said, and we jump to conclusions that aren't supported by the evidence. Social context plays a significant role in shaping our perception. Consider a simple experiment where people are asked to judge the length of a line. If they are placed in a group where everyone else gives the wrong answer, they are more likely to conform and give the same incorrect response. This phenomenon is known as social conformity. Our brains are wired to seek approval and avoid conflict. This can lead us to doubt our own perceptions and align with the group, even when we know they are wrong. Social context doesn't just influence our judgments, it can also affect our sensory experiences. For instance, in a noisy environment, we might mishear a word based on what we expect others to say. The influence of social context extends to our emotions and behaviors as well. When we see someone else react with fear or excitement, our brains can mirror these emotions. This is due to mirror neurons, which help us understand and empathize with others. However, this mirroring can also distort our perception, making us more susceptible to groupthink and collective hysteria. Understanding the impact of social context on perception is crucial. It reminds us to be aware of the external influences that shape our reality. By questioning these influences, we can strive to see the world more clearly and make more informed decisions. One of the most fascinating ways to see the limits of perception is through optical illusions. Optical illusions are visual tricks that exploit the way our brains process information. They reveal the shortcuts our brains take in constructing our visual world. Take the classic Müller-Lyer illusion, for example. Two lines are the same length, yet one appears longer than the other. Why? Because our brains have learned to interpret converging lines as a sign of depth. The inward-pointing fins make the lines seem closer and therefore shorter. Another striking example is the checker shadow illusion. Two squares, A and B, are identical in color. However, our brains perceive them as different shades of grey due to the surrounding context and the shadow cast by the cylinder. This illusion highlights how our brains constantly adjust for lighting and shadows to determine the true color of objects. Motion illusions are equally captivating. These illusions use static images to create the perception of movement. This is because our brains are wired to detect changes in our environment. When we see a rapid succession of slightly different images, our brains interpret this as motion. These illusions, while entertaining, serve a crucial purpose. They provide valuable insights into the complex workings of the visual system. They demonstrate that our perception is not a passive process, it is an active construction, influenced by both the information we receive and the assumptions our brains make.